Informatica Power Center architecture is outlined based on the services which are created. Okay, the services are there are two main services which are required. One is called the integration service. Okay, the other one is the repository service. Okay, there are multiple other services which are available as part of the basic standard license, but these two are mandatory for us to configure, for us to load any kind of source into any kind of targets. Okay, let's talk about each of the component here, and then we'll go to the services part. Now, what the architecture which we are discussing is applicable to all the 9.x related components, including 9.5, the BDE, the latest edition which got released recently. The major changes which have happened in 9.5 are mostly related to IDQ, Informatica Data Quality, but we are talking about the Power Center now, which do not have major changes within its structure. Okay, now let's talk about each of the components from the beginning, then I'll explain you the services. So the first thing is, what are the different kinds of sources which will be connected to the Informatica? We can have any relational, flat file, applications, unstructured data formats as sources, similarly as targets. Now that sources and targets can be connected to the domain. Domain is the base foundation of Informatica installation on which all of these services are built. Okay, now the connection between the various kinds of sources which we spoke about and the various kinds of targets is based on either their own specific native drives or the ODBC connections. What are native drives here? Native drives are the connection links for one kind of source to Informatica and for the target as well. For example, if you have SAP and if you have to read the data through SAP's database, then we have to have a drive with which you will connect to SAP database directly using Informatica. Similarly, if you have to load the data into, for example, Teradata's database, then you should have either a native driver which is inbuilt within Informatica or an ODBC connection which is acceptable by both the applications, which is Informatica and Teradata, and then it will go into the target. Okay, now that's how Informatica connects to various systems. Here you have another thing which also have to be written, which is network. For example, flat files fixed width or delimited. Now those kind of flat files should pass through the system over the network, right? TCP IP connections. So that's one. Now let's talk about the big arrow here. These are the different kinds of client tools which are available within Informatica Power Center. The first one is, whichever is denoted with the alphabet, it is a repository manager. We'll park this. We have a complete hour session on this. Understand that this is one of the client tools from which we do the deployment activities. What are the deployment activities? We move code from one environment to another environment, from your development environment to the test environment and then to the production environment. Okay, there are other activities also which can be done. This is again split into two in the whole of our course discussion. Half of it will be discussed in the beginning and the rest half at the end, because the deployment activities will be discussed at the end. For that, we need to understand all the objects available and the dependencies within those objects, so the deployment will be done at the end of it. Okay, designer. This is where 70% of a developer's work is involved. This is where the core transformations come into picture. You have a business requirement document of 50 pages. Now you derived it into 20 different steps to be done. and those 20 different steps should be set up using different transformations in a single flow or a multiple flows, based on which we can order the way the data should be flowing in. Okay, this is called mapping designer. The other one is workflow manager and workflow monitor. For every flow which we decide, the flow is called the mapping. Now let's say I have a flat file which is present in the network location from which I want to load it to a DB. Okay, now where is the flat file located? What is the network connection? Where is the DB? Which server should that connect to? What is the username password? Does the username password have the right privileges? And all that information should be given in the workflow manager using different tasks. Okay, for now understand that designer takes 70% of your development activities and workflow will take 20% of your development activities. So altogether 90% of your development activities should be done within these two tools. Okay, creating the flow, assigning the properties to the flow, and monitor is just the monitor where we see when we execute the jobs, we figure out what are the jobs which are running, what are the jobs which have failed, succeeded, scheduled, unscheduled, should we restore it, and all those kind of things at the monitor. Okay, so 4 different tools. I'll repeat them again. Repository manager to maintain. From the developer's perspective, repository manager's core purpose is to use it for deployment and folder creation. Second tool, mapping designer. This is where we have all the list of transformations which are required for a developer to put in the business requirements in place into a flow. Number 3, workflow manager. Workflow manager is an extension to the mapping designer where we give further information to the Informatica server saying this particular source is available at XYZ location and it should be going into a particular database which is on ABC server with username XYZ and ABC password. Okay, there is more to it. There are more properties within the workflow manager. We will discuss all of it when we go to that level. Workflow monitor, as the name is there as monitor, we monitor this tool to figure out what jobs are running, if there are any failures, what is the failure, how do we see how many number of records have been processed, if anything has got rejected, the reason for rejection, and if I want to restart, if I want to schedule, unschedule, all of these activities are done within the monitor tool. Okay, those are the client tools. Now the client tools can connect to the targets using the ODBC connection. Now the connections are not I would not say standard. I would say it is based on what kind of source and what kind of target we are using and what is the methodology which is being followed within that project. For example, if I have to get a flat file from a particular FTP location, there are multiple ways for each of the system to read this. Let's say I can write a Unix script to pull that flat file from the FTP location to my source directory, or I can have Informatica directly connect to the FTP location, read the source and process it. Similarly, database. Obviously database requires its own drives. Majority of the databases have their own drives, Oracle, SQL Server, Teradata, DB2, anything. If those are not there, we can use the commonly available ODBC drives, which also should be updated now and then. Okay, now that's all the outline of what is required. Now let's see what is there for the Informatica within the domain. Okay, let me clear this. If you have any questions, you can stop me in between. Okay, now let's talk about the service-oriented architecture of Informatica. When we say service-oriented architecture, there are services which run to do the assigned task of those service along with helping other services to perform their own tasks. Okay. Now, we spoke about, yeah, is there any question? Gautam, can you please go on mute?
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay. So we were talking about the service-oriented architecture, and there is something called as domain. Now that's the base foundation. When I say base foundation, what does that mean? Informatica, when we are installing Informatica, it needs a database before Informatica is installed. Why does it need a database? Because Informatica runs on the metadata of its own content. Okay, when we do the installation, we first create the domain and then a couple of other requirements, and then the services. We'll see what those requirements are. Now, the moment we start creating the domain, it will ask us for the database username password. Okay, when we give that username password, it creates around close to 200 different tables. Now these are all inbuilt Informatica related metadata tables. This is not related to any of your business requirement on how to pull the data from your source and how to load it into the target. This is all internal to Informatica. Now on those base tables, on reading the content from that base tables, we create multiple other components called nodes, and on top of nodes we create grids. Okay, I'll show all that. Now this domain, once it is available, there are two main services which are required. One is integration service, the other is repository service. What is integration service? If you see here, we have connected integration service specifically to two of the client tools, which is Workflow Manager and Workflow Monitor. That's because integration service comes into picture when we actually execute the flow. For example, when I want to design it, when I'm putting the flow in process where I'm importing the source file, importing the target, have done a couple of transformations, and when I save it, all that is taken as a command by the repository service where it reads all that features and loads it into the repository metadata, which means whatever I save, whatever objects I create, edit, delete, and save them will go into my repository database. This is the database which we spoke about when we talked about the metadata tables. Okay, that's called repository. Now, anything which should go in and come out of repository, it should be done using the repository service. Okay, let's say I saved something and tomorrow there is a change in the requirement. I have to edit it. The moment I edit it and save it, it is the repository service which will recognize or take that command of save, send it across to the repository using its own services of create, insert, delete, or change the repository content. Once it is done here, it will again send a signal to the repository service which will be sent to the client tools. Okay. Now where does integration service come into picture? Integration service comes into picture when we actually process the data, execute the flow, which is I created a workflow and I started it. The moment I start it, it gives the command to integration service. Integration service will send the name of the workflow to the repository service, which in turn will send it to the repository. Repository will give all the related information related to this workflow to the repository service back again, which will be sent to the integration service for doing the processing. Once that processing is over, it will load the data into the targets. So these two have their own standard steps to be followed, along with depending on the other services. Now if I have only repository service without the integration service, then all I can do is work on my content without executing anything. Now without executing any of the jobs, I will obviously not know if it's right or wrong, right? I need to see the target to figure out if my flow which I've put in place is right or wrong, right? So these two are the core services. Okay, there is one more thing which is called as nodes. I'll show that to you right after this. So let's park it for now. What are these two? We spoke about the sources, targets, the client tools which are using, the domain, integration service, repository service. Now the repository service process is the one, which relates this repository service to the repository and then back to it. Okay, we spoke about the database, internal database of Informatica, and how the flow happens in a cyclic manner from the client tools, from the command to the services, and how the cycle works. Okay, now what is this admin console and the domain config? Administration console is nothing but it's a web-based tool. Just a minute, let me log into it. I'll explain this to you. Okay, admin console is a web-based thin client where Informatica's administrative tasks can be taken care. Okay, what are the administrative tasks? Creating the integration service, creating the repository service, assigning grids, assigning high availability, assigning the recovery part. So these are all admin activities. Usually in any development project, the access to the admin console is restricted for most of the developers if there is a specific administrator who is taking care of all of it. Now if there is none, it will be given read access, with which all you can do is just verify the logs and raise a ticket or raise a mail to some group which maintains all of this centrally to do the activity which you want to do. Okay, now from here, apart from managing the services, I can create users, delete users, restrict their permissions to a particular tool, and multiple things. We have a separate session for this. We will talk about that. So in the admin console, the main part, if you see here, the root is the domain. Okay, now that domain, under the domain you can have multiple nodes. What are nodes? Node is nothing but a physical machine. For example, I have this installed on my laptop, so it is taking my laptop's name. Okay, now if I want to use the same domain configuration in the other laptop of mine, I can still use it using the network connection. Okay, then this, what you see here, will become my primary node, which is node 1, and the second laptop on which I'm configuring this domain will become secondary. Okay, so node is nothing but a physical machine. In real time, you will have, let's say the installation is being done on Unix. If you have two boxes, Unix box 1 and box 2, box 1 will become your primary node, box 2 will become your secondary node. Why do we need primary and secondary? One of the architectural features of Informatica is high availability. For any reason, if node 1 is going down, network issue, connection issue, whatever it is, power issue, outage, whatever is the case, if node 1 is going down, it will automatically fall over to node 2. Now what is so important within that? Isn't that the case for every backup plan? It is. Here, if there are any production jobs which are running at that point in time, without getting the jobs failed, the node 2 will start over for the processes to continue. There will be a small glitch, but based on the configuration which you are doing, based on the standards which you are following, based on the policies of the project and the company which you're working on, the follower should be set up and it will be taken care from there. A single node is mandatory and n number of nodes can be configured to the domain. Okay, under each node I can have n number of services. If you see here, we just spoke about two of them, right? We spoke about integration service, repository service. But for a node, I can have any kind of services which are applicable as part of my license. Okay, that's for a node. Now, what are the services which are available and which you can configure? These are all the list of services which we can configure. And we discussed as of now the repository service, integration service, web services hub. This service is required when we are connecting to the WSDLs or any of the web related content to read or to load. Metadata manager service. This is for MDM, the metadata manager service. This should be configured for it to work. Okay, and then SAP BW service. If either of your source or your target is SAP, and if you have to connect to that business warehouse of SAP either to read the data or to load the data or even for using as a reference, you need to have this service configured. Reporting service. Informatica has a reporting tool within itself which is not so famous. If it's required, then we need to configure the repository service. Now the next four services, from the model repository service to the analyst service, all four are related to Informatica data quality. This is called model repository service, MRS, DIS, data integration service, CMS, content management service, and analyst service. Power Exchange listener, Power Exchange logger. These are the two different Power Exchange tools which we can configure to get the CDC and the logging service. And this is for the dashboards. I can configure all of this based on my requirement under a single node. Okay, that's the processes which we were seeing under the node here. Okay, I have created integration, repository, and everything related to IDQ. So everything is in running status. Okay, now that's the base, which is the domain, and then the physical machine which reads the content through that domain. And on top of it, I'm building the services which are required